everybody's here now. So thanks everyone for coming, particularly council. I know that we had this discussion, but I may have gapped on things. So in review, we realized that there are some timelines and some strategic things involved in this, and it's not about a money thing. So with that, we have been called to order, looking for approval of our Committee of the Whole agenda.
Move approval, Your Worship.
All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. Want to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. And looking for approval of this agenda for this evening.
We just did that.
Oh, well, I did it before. I did it ahead of my greeting. Mr. Wadsworth from BC Transit. I know you were here last week, but come on up.
Thank you for having me back. All right, so my understanding is that I'll go through the presentation again for the public who may not have been here before, and just to re-highlight the discussion. So we're here tonight to talk about the Island Highway Transit Priority Project. I think we're all familiar with the challenges out here. People are stuck in traffic trying to commute, and so are the buses. And over time, transit, the service levels are eroding because the buses are stuck in traffic, and the buses are getting busier. I actually just looked at some ridership data from yesterday, and we're now carrying 8,800 people a day on the Route 50, which is the main route on this corridor. There's 8 other bus routes that also carry thousands of people a day. And even just last year, we were only carrying 7,000 people a day. So more people are using transit, so there is an opportunity to make the commute better for them. We have a transit future plan, and it's important to say that the potential projects that we're discussing here are part of the transit future plan vision. It's a piece of the puzzle of a larger project of having bus lanes on Douglas Street and having bus on shoulder lanes on Highway 1. And now we're planning concepts for out here in Colwood, and we're hoping to continue on to look at other areas of the West Shore to make transit flow better in Langford and possibly other locations in Colwood. It's a priority of the Transit Commission. It's the #1 thing they've asked us to do is improve transit to and from the West Shore between Victoria and the West Shore. And it's not just people moving to Victoria for employment. There's lots of people that work out here. We're actually having to put double-decker buses on the what people think of as the reverse commute. So double-deckers are leaving the West Shore in the afternoon full and bringing people back who might work out here but live in Victoria. The objectives of the study were to improve transit travel, and we're looking at different transit priority measures, and we've also looked at opportunity to improve park and ride capacity, not just in Colwood, but the entire West Shore, so looking further out in Souk and Langford. The study area for transit priority was from the Colwood interchange at Highway 1 all the way to Colwood Corners. And we've gone through a process where we had SNC-Lavalin look at how intersections could work and what the best transit priority treatments could be to help people move. And now we have a final concept report, which is really just the first step that allows us to go out to the public and do engagement, engage stakeholders like developers, like ONI, where we need to work with what the Transit Commission would like us to do and try and integrate those into their frontage plans. Because we wouldn't, if we have a project that's acceptable, potentially acceptable here, we wouldn't want to see things have to be built twice. The treatments that we looked at were coordinating signals. We're looking at transit signal priority so the buses can talk to the intersections and give themselves an extra 20 or 30 seconds to get through. Short queue-jump lanes around the intersections. We're looking all the way up to lanes along the whole corridor. I think in a perfect world, we'd have bus lanes all the way from Victoria, all the way out into Langford to West Hills, and we'd have transit signal priority. And that's really that key interim step that gets us all the way to where we might want to be in the future with something like a light rail wrap looking at corridors. Corridors are only so big, and they have constraints. So if we want to fit things like bus lanes in and maintain auto traffic lanes and be able to have bike lanes and sidewalks, there's fitting all that in the corridor is constrained. So it really came down to the quick wins around the intersections, and I'll touch on that again. At Goldstream and in front of the Ani development, at Whale Road, there was room for queue jumper lanes. And then along most of the corridor, it's quite constrained at this point. But again, at 6 Mile, there's the opportunity to look at bus on shoulder lanes that connects with potential lanes on the highway. Some of those are being built right now to date. I know that one of our frequent transit travelers, he saved 8 minutes yesterday on his time home. So that's a big win. If we can do more things, that will make it even better. So this is the treatments in Colwood. The frontage in front of Ani is quite important. We need to work with them and engage them on these concepts, and also at Whale Road. These have minimal property takes. There's some slivers that we might need to acquire or look at ways to design out. So some more work needs to be done on developing the plans, but that would be the next phase, as would doing more engagement. And this is the location from 6 Mile in onto the highway. And now that the ministry knows that we're working on this, they're starting to look at their off-ramp onto the highway, and they're starting to do more designs that could align with the concept here if we chose to move forward with it. We'd also equip more buses with transit signal priority. Right now we have 294 buses in our fleet. 50 are equipped with the priority, and we'd like to equip another 55 buses. And why 55 buses? Because that's actually the number of buses that are running on the Island Highway that are going in and out of service on the routes. So lots of people are using those buses, and we need to equip 55 of them to make it all work. And so when you look at the big picture, with all these pieces of the puzzle, with what we're doing with the City of Victoria, what we're doing with the ministry on the highway, and what the Transit Commission would like to do out here in the West Shore, that's all going to add up to 20 minutes of savings, which is 20 minutes relative to travel times in the automobile. So that's a big savings, a big win for people that are choosing to take transit, and will encourage more people to take transit. Communities that have made these kind of investments, they quite quickly see a 30% increase in transit ridership. So that would be a good thing. It's all gone through a multiple account evaluation process to see for the investment, is there value? And yes, there is values in these ones. And that information is in, I think, page 40 of the technical report. I'm not going to touch on the park and rides today, but we have locations that are outside of the City of Colwood that we'd like to work, the Transit Commission would like to work with Langford, View Royal, and Souk on looking at, and we'll work with them to do that. There's a need for 600 spots, and these would really help meet that need and free up space at the West Shore Rec 1 for more people to use that. And so we're asking for, I think with the staff report, approval in principle, and what that would allow us to do is an indication to the Transit Commission there's an interest in this project, so we could go out, do more engagement with the community. Now we have some concepts that we'd like to talk about. Also would allow us to work with the developers to make sure that they understand what our functional requirements are, and we can see the Transit Commission can, we could work on their behalf to look at those things. And this would allow us to go back to the Transit Commission, and for the Transit Commission to fund this project in Colwood, just like they funded the one in the City of Victoria. And with the City of Victoria, we went through a similar process. As a part of the approval in principle there, they had asked us, a subject to was more engagement and coming back and reporting back on how that engagement went, and working with their staff to develop more detailed plans that we could move forward. So that's what I've got.
Good, thank you very much. I'm going to open up to members of the public. If you have any questions of James and the presentation, now would be your time, and he will do his best to answer. Mr. Baxter, the usual name and identification.
Michael Baxter, 3338 East Wink Road. There's been some talk in the community about HOV lanes, and I understand that HOV lanes can be a disbenefit to transit, and that the lanes on the highway are not being designed as HOV, but as purely bus. But it kind of highlights the fact that we don't have an authority in the area that really looks at the overall picture. I'm thrilled about what BC Transit is doing, and I quite understand that they wouldn't want to do anything that's a disbenefit to transit. But I don't know if there's anybody else who's capable of delivering, you know, the other opinion of whether there's any disbenefit to the rest of traffic not having HOV. So that just speaks to the missing transport authority. But I really wanted to talk about one of the recommendations that Council directs staff to work with the ONI Group and BC Transit to determine a mutually beneficial frontage improvement design. And I just wanted to point out that Bunt did a lot of work with the previous owners to come up with a design that included transit lanes, bike lanes, sidewalks, and I just hope that that hasn't been discarded, all that work. Not saying it should be adopted without change, I'm just saying I hope it was taken into account as work already done that would show what was at the time considered an acceptable method of doing that. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? Eve? Oh.
Good evening, Eve Millington, 553 Delora Drive. I'm just curious, as far as the park and rides go, I noticed that the corner of VMP and Souk Road is under consideration. How realistic is the suitability? I mean, there's a lot of vacant land there. I'm not sure who owns it all, but what's the probability or reality of that being added to the pool of park and ride facilities down the road? Thank you.
James?
We looked at a number of potential locations, including the one at Veterans Memorial and Souk Road, and we're showing it as a location that we looked at, but I think it would be more correct if this slide said that would have been a site that was looked at but screened out. Because I think of the accesses and the amount of space and adjacent land uses.
That answer? So but that one was looked at but screened out of potential? Can we go to the mic, please, James?
Certainly. I'd have to look back at my memory of what's in the report, but if I recall, it was for the value of the cost of the land and how many potential spots you could get out of it, there were other sites that had more value, I think because the land was likely at a lower cost and you could get more spots for your money. I think that's a simple way of saying it.
Judith?
Good evening, Judith Collington, 3338 Acemink. So first of all, thank you. Thank you, James, for giving up yet another evening to come and talk to us. Thank you, Council, for giving us the chance to stand up and make some comment and ask some questions. So I'm one of many people who do take the bus. I'm fortunate I live and work out in Colwood, but I do take the bus downtown a fair bit, and I absolutely understand the pain of getting the bus to and from in rush hour. And this is a really important project, so I think it's very exciting, and I hope that Council will support the staff recommendation here tonight. Having said that, just a few sort of questions, comments. The first question is around timing. So my understanding is that this phase primarily is the sort of the short queue jumper lanes and the priority signals. So my first question is, if the universe unfolds the way that we all hope that it might, what would be the kind of expected timing for the kind of full bus lane along Island Highway?
On the TC, are you talking?
So on the Island Highway portion, I can. That's a good question. I think it's more than $1 million question, but it's. I think one of the things that we should look at is get a high level sense of what does it cost to do the rest of the corridor. I know one of the big pinch points is the bridge, and that would be an expensive thing to replace. But I think that we do have room to do more study work or more detailed design work, and it's something that I think we should be looking at to get a sense of how that would work. I know that Saanich is struggling with the same thing on Shelburne corridor. Ideally, the corridor isn't what you'd want it to be for walking, cycling, and general traffic, and they have a long-term strategy to acquire properties or do more work, and so that's something we could look at, but it would have to have engagement as part of it to do that.
So based on that, I really like the way the staff recommendation is written, which kind of obviously sort of, I think, if you decide to adopt it, says, we think this is a really important project, please keep moving ahead as fast as possible. The park and ride, I'm assuming that the recommended sites that we're seeing in green up there are in addition to the existing park and ride site at Holwood. You're not intending to kind of decommission that one.
I would say the report identifies a need for several hundred parking stalls if it's 600. So we need multiple locations, but tonight we're here more to resolve the transit priority part of the project, and there's not a tight timeline on figuring out the park and ride part of it. So those are things that we need to continue to work on.
I also appreciate the extra time I got to kind of read the rest of the package and including all the maps. So there's a lot of detail in there, and I will save most of my comments until the public consultation phase. I did want to make one very minor comment, and it is related to park and ride, and I know that's kind of further down the road. But in the park and ride design for the 6 Mile area, the map, the way it's shown, puts the bike parking over here, and where you access the point to cross the road is over here. And I would love to see the bike parking moved up to be close to where people are going across the road. But that's minor. My only real concern is the frontage by Oni. What I'm seeing in the plans at the moment, there are no bike lanes showing there. And I know there is the option of bikes and buses sharing a lane, but if we're building something, particularly as we're in the business of kind of doing a new frontage improvement, it's an opportunity. Yes, I know space is limited, but at the same time, I'm kind of looking out to a future 20 years from now when we've got really rapid transit system, not only along kind of going up and along Goldstream, but also coming down Souk Road, servicing Royal Bay and all the other areas. I think we need to be, as staff work with transit going forward, I think it would be really nice to kind of look at are there opportunities to really keep a bike lane as well as a bus lane there. So I'll throw that challenge out to you. So thank you, good opportunity, and good luck.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? And for the last time, any other members of the public? Seeing none, I'm going to turn it to council. Any questions or comments that you may have to James?
Thank you. And James, I realize the park and ride is not the priority tonight, but I do have to ask, and I may have to route it through the mayor to our own staff. But can you explain what's going on in the Royal Bay area? Is there plans on an actual exchange in Royal Bay? And if there is, are we ever planning on doing some park and ride down there as well? I don't see it listed at all, and I'm just trying to understand what the long-term vision is.
I'd have to look back at what we have in the transit future plan, but I think we did identify having a minor bus terminal in Royal Bay potentially, and that would be dependent on the route structure. So potentially we would have we could potentially have a bus route that starts in Royal Bay and heads all the way downtown, and that would be the end of the line out there. So it might make a natural point for park and ride if there is space to consider that. And we could also have another bus route that starts there, goes down Latoria and through Langford to make connections that way. So there potential for something minor. I think in the past we'd looked at doing something like an on-street bus bay that has the ability for buses to dwell there for a while.
So just as a quick follow-up, so I guess I'm just trying to understand, at what point does BC Transit see it as a priority to acquire those lands before the land gets developed so that it actually has the ability to make it happen? My concern is that Royal Bay builds out and then there's no land for them to actually be able to do an exchange or a park and ride. So at what point within that cycle will BC Transit actually look at that?
Now you're actually asking me a good question. Now, one of the next things we have to do out here is to continue to look at the corridors for transit priority further out, being Royal Bay and into Langford. I have budget. The Transit Commission has budget set aside to do that, so that's something we could potentially, the terms of reference have not gone out for that, so that's something that we're wanting to look at as part of a consideration for building, whether we want to call it rapid bus or just bus route with park and ride is something we could definitely give consideration to.
One final.
Yep.
I guess I'm just going to look to our own staff. Has there been any, or you can comment on that, Ian?
Through your worship, the Royal Bay plan going back to the original conception of the project had a transit exchange built into the development agreement and planning of the central area, now called the Commons. Royal Bay has applied for a official community plan amendment and rezoning to address the finer grain planning of that area, and we're talking to them now about how to achieve that transit exchange.
Any other members of council? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I realize that this is a long-range plan that we are endorsing and a relative direction, but I would really like to see some focus on things that would actually improve transit soon. High occupancy vehicle lanes were mentioned, and unfortunately those questions didn't get answered. Michael Baxter asked about those. So that is a big question for me, because high occupancy vehicle lanes have been used in Kelowna, where they have a similar commuting issue to support transit. They've been used already downtown at designated times of the day. So short of building the $1 million infrastructure, what are the quick wins that this plan could produce for improved transit even in the next 5 years?
So the bus lanes or time of day that have been built in the city of Victoria are not HOV lanes. They have the diamond, which often gets confused with an HOV symbol. It means it's a restricted lane. You'll see the same thing on a painted bike lane. Those are for buses and not for not for car sharing with two or three. The lanes that are being built right now on the highway that are partially opened are bus on shoulder lanes. They don't meet the standard for high occupancy vehicle lanes. And the lanes out here, queue jump lanes would be for buses too. The buses would have to activate the signal for them to work. And this is not a long-range plan. This is a very short-range plan where we're wanting to move into engagement and design with the community. The pieces of it are being built right now on Highway 1, so I would characterize this as a short-range plan where we'd like to implement something in the next 2 years after we've gone through the process of talking to the public, the businesses, and working with the Transit Commission for the Transit Commission to have a budget to be able to do just what they did with the City of Victoria out here in Colwood and in View Royal.
So there is no plan currently for high occupancy vehicle lanes, like there's 2 lanes now each way. One of those would not be dedicated to high occupancy vehicles and transit at this time.
The plans are for transit lanes, so for only transit vehicles to use them. In cases where there's a driveway, single occupant vehicle is allowed into the lane to make the right turn into the driveway or at the intersection.
Just want to maybe have you clarify, Councillor Day, are you speaking of Souk Road where these improvements are slated to be taking place, or are you talking about TransCanada?
I'm talking about Souk Road
Souk Road?
in Colwood. So currently we have 2 lanes basically in each direction.
Yeah.
So is nothing going to happen unless a 3rd lane is built for buses only?
I'm not 100% understanding. There's 2 lanes today in each direction, plus bike lanes in some sections. And what we're looking at doing is adding a lane for buses beside those, and fitting that into the geometry of the road. In some cases, that means tightening up all the lanes to achieve it, or in some cases, it means going into the right-of-way and reworking the sidewalk.
Okay, so none of this plan would include dedicating lanes that are currently used for cars to be used for buses.
There's no plans to take away bike lanes or car lanes for this project. In fact, in the View Royal section, where bus on shoulder lane or bus lanes are being planned, as part of it will include a 1.8 meter bike lane on either side, which doesn't exist.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Sorry, the plans in the View Royal section would include also adding a bike lane where there isn't one right now, and out here, we're potentially looking at more work, extending the lanes further. If that's something that happens through the engagement process, we would be looking to make improvements like that out here.
So you're saying that View Royal will get new bike lanes and Colwood isn't yet scheduled what they're getting?
I'd have to take a look at the design out here. I don't have it right in front of me, but we're not taking away anything to make the bus lanes. It's all within the existing design to maintain or add bus lanes.
Okay. That's definitely not very clear from the plans that I've looked at, and I've looked at them fairly carefully to see if I can see what's being proposed, and currently I guess it will become clearer as the plan goes forward. But I'd like to draw your attention to page 4 of your presentation, which shows the different areas from downtown. That was it. Back up one. That one.
Yep.
So my concern with this slide is that this is a View Royal and Colwood plan that's being developed, and this slide shows a majority of development being done in Langford. In fact, the destination appears to be West Hills, and Colwood gets a black arrow pointing towards Royal Bay. So I don't feel that we're getting any real information about what's going to happen for our future development core area in Royal Bay. And a plan that's being presented to us is in fact actually facilitating neighboring service, not our own.
So this is a map of the alignment that was identified for rapid transit as part of the Transit Future Plan. And we've recently added the West Shore Transit Priority Study to that. And in that terms of reference, I should probably have it on here, but it looks at all of Souk Road out to Jacqueline. It also looks at the potential of connections down to Royal Bay and identifies a number of corridors in Colwood that could be assessed, not for bus lanes everywhere, but for transit priority measures. So that's likely it would turn out to be where the bus is able to talk to the intersection and get an extra 20 seconds. So the study area is the entire West Shore out here, and so it provides us the opportunity to look at potential treatments that would benefit people using transit throughout Colwood and Langford.
Okay, I'll be hopeful on that. The original plan for Royal Bay did include a park and ride, and the last time I saw that articulated, it had been shrunk to like a dozen spaces. So I think that's going to be critical in the future for Colwood as development occurs and Machosen Road becomes busier. My experience on transit, having used it for 30 years, is that it hasn't been getting easier to take transit. In fact, in some cases, it's getting harder to take transit. And so my interest is really in preserving and protecting the future planning for transit. We've lost service to Esquimalt Lagoon, for example. Instead of every bus going to Esquimalt Lagoon, every second bus is now going to Lagoon. And those are important destinations, especially it's one of the few accessible natural parks for people with disabilities. So it's a very important access to maintain. I'll leave it at that, but I'm concerned that we don't see in this plan any specifics that will improve our transit in the near term.
Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, James. And I appreciate the limited scope that you have to operate with regards to the Island Highway and TCH. So, but I do take Michael's comments about HOV lanes. Seriously, when I used them going through Seattle and the I-5, I loved them. They were phenomenal. And but I recognize the challenge that transit faces. I also recognize the difference in the amount of corridor that V Royal has from TCH to the 6 Mile Bridge versus what Colwood has to offer at the moment. It's from what I've seen, it's a lot more challenging on the Colwood portion. Therefore, it's a bit more limiting. I would a quick question. Counterflow lanes, at least as a short-term measure, has that been something that could be considered or has been considered to move transit vehicles during rush hours, similar to the mainland?
I first have to start by saying I am not a traffic engineer. I'm a transit planner. And,
fair enough.
We looked at our consultant, who are transportation engineers, looked at a number of options to get buses moving. and these are the ones that they recommended to us. So these, on this part of the corridor, the travel time savings for transit is 20%, and that's with these modest interventions at the intersections and putting signal priority on the buses. And so that's what we're coming to you with what the professional recommendations were.
Thank you, and I do appreciate this map because it gives me a broad perspective of the improvements that have taken place and that will take place. So I see the benefit of us seeing that map. So I appreciate that. I would just say that this is at the very beginning stages of the consultation process. So I know that this plan will probably change and evolve as there's more public consultation. So I am certainly not going to sit here and beat up on transit to say we should have this or that or the other thing, because it's so early. This is not the final stage, and I don't think that's fair. So in my mind, I think the sooner we start the consultation and the planning, the better. I think the city's got some high hopes for the Old Island Highway corridor to be redeveloped. So from a long-range perspective, it would be nice to know what the ultimate goal is. So as that corridor develops, then the city is able to secure land along the way, so we're not chasing our tails after the fact and trying to acquire stuff. So I appreciate that, and if there are some short-term wins that we can get in the meantime, then that's important. The one thing for me, of course, with the improvement in transit times and all that stuff, is the visual aspect of that corridor, and making sure that we're not building a concrete jungle cross-section because we're utilizing every square foot of corridor, and that we build in some landscaping and all that jazz to make it inviting. So those are my 2 cents worth.
Those are similar concerns that the City of Victoria had when we did the Douglas Street portion, and as part of the engagement process, we heard that from the public, and so the budget was increased to include a significant amount of landscaping.
Your Worship, if there's no further speakers, I'm happy to recommendation.
Well, I just want to give staff chance on that report on 4.1. So we'll just conclude questions and answer. Sure. And just want to say thank you, James, because I think that this is an important piece. Approval and getting this underway is what works in putting pressure on the province to get that red zone in play.
Absolutely.
That's my focus. No more Colwood crawl.
That is right on.
Yeah, that's right. It'll be something else. I'm going to go to staff on 4.1, please, if there's anything in that report that follows the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. As noted in both the presentation and the report itself, staff and BC Transit are really seeking approval in principle of the concepts. I think everybody agrees that we're at the very beginning of a process, and we're simply trying to make sure that we're still on track. We're on track with Council's vision, we're on track with BC Transit's vision, and we're still just moving forward. You will note that the approval in concept did come subject to some conditions that staff felt were important to Council and to the community as a whole. And you'll note them under option 1, which was the recommendation that BC Transit undertake additional planning to ensure that the proposed improvements can be integrated into the next phase of implementation of the bus-based rapid transit corridor along Island Highway. That BC Transit undertake additional planning to identify opportunities to extend the proposed transit priority lanes to more fully achieve dedicated bus lanes along the Island Highway corridor in Phase 1, and that BC Transit undertake public engagement activities to share information and collect feedback from key stakeholders and the general public. And also that Council directs staff to work with ONI Group and BC Transit to determine a mutually beneficial frontage improvement design that incorporates the priority improvement at Colwood Corners. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knoll?
I just wanted to be very clear at what we're voting on. We are voting on approval in principle strictly of Phase 1, I believe. not the entire plan. And just to make it very clear, if I read the presentation correctly, the improvements for Colwood in Phase 1 are 3 queue jumps and 2 transit signal changes. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that is the beginning of Phase 1, correct?
Okay, in that case, what else does Phase 1 entail?
Through your worship, it would entail, if council so endorsed, the conditions associated with option 1, which are further planning and public engagement and consultation.
I'm very keen on the further planning, because if I recall from the Transportation Master Plan, we do not have the right-of-way to do what's in the Transportation Master Plan anywhere along Island Corridor or Souk Road. So I'm very keen to see what kind of planning can go into that. And I appreciate Councillor Day's question about shared HOV bus lanes. I think that might be the way we will have to go if we don't have the right-of-way. And that's something we should be planning for now. Thank you.
I'll move the staff recommendation, Your Worship.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We ran over our time, folks, so we'll conclude the committee of the whole at this point.
Move adjournment.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion